Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Data Standard Audio Experience. Today, we have Andrea Cifor, the Director of Actuarial Data Governance at Nationwide Insurance. And today, we're speaking about the exciting topic of data quality. So, welcome to the show, Andrea. I'm very excited to have you on the show today.
Well, greetings to all of you. As Kat had said, I am currently the Director of Actuarial Data Governance. I've been working with data for over 30 years now. I've played all the roles from developer, tester, and analyst. I've seen the evolution of data fads and functions over time. In the end, there is a commonality. The best governance is based on the data and those who consume the data. I like to consider myself a bit of a governance renegade. I don't believe there is one size fits all, but also because governance should be a support system. We provide guide wires, not dictate constraints. Now, there are constraints we are required to do. It may be from a legal perspective or from, other types of constraints that we have from privacy, et cetera, that affect us. But in the end, a lot of the governance organizations begin with a more traditional approach to governance concepts. It's just easier. It's typically safer to execute top down, defining the terms, the dimensions, et cetera. We feel safe with that. We are language people. We aren't data, just like data was not the original goal of what produces data, which is computing. And we'll talk about that more as I proceed through some of our questions.
Yeah, definitely. And let's get started with some of these questions. So, the first question I have for you is really, how do you determine the quality data? How do you know that what you have is good data for what you want to accomplish?
This is a really challenging question for most companies. So typically we think in terms of completeness, accuracy, and timeliness as the foundation. But in reality, the quality of data is dependent on a number of factors. First of all, you have to think about your consumer, but you also have to think about literally how data is created. For example, I go to a website, I click on something, I enter something in a field. It could be my search results. It could be what I do when I click through on something. But all of that information translates to information that people want to be able to measure and manage. So how do you measure quality? Most companies don't start with the measurement of whatever is happening. So for example, how do I know how many click-throughs, how many people are visiting my site, et cetera? Those are common things. But then we don't look at how data traverses across different systems until it comes to us. So with that consideration, you've got to measure your data. First of all, don't have a goal. Don't think about what you're trying to accomplish. The data itself and that life cycle are going to tell you if it is of good quality. Now that seems simple, but the first things that I like to look at are whether or not it's on time, it's complete, and it's accurate. So if you start with those items, then you'll be able to get to a point of at least measuring something intentionally and understanding that output. Based off of that, you're going to discover a lot of other things. Because if you have those basic measurements, you can translate those into other types of things that you're looking at. You can communicate to your customer, but your data's on time, it's 100% accurate based on the definition they gave you. Again, they define quality, you don't. And the last one is whether or not it's complete. And completeness is very different depending on who consumes the data. Again, you need to think about your consumer. If you're a data scientist, it's okay to get a lot of data and a little bit of junk. You can clean it out. You can do whatever you do because you're able to throw things out, things that don't follow your trends, your patterns, et cetera, because they could be anomalies. But if you're somebody that is an analyst, if you work in finance, if you work as an actuary, you don't get to throw any of that out. In fact, most times you're digging into that 10% or 5% anomalous data to try to figure out how it really fits and how you can report on it or use it. So quality, again, is a definition based on use, but it's also based on the entire life cycle. Once you understand some of the goals downstream or the uses downstream, you can look at the origin of the data, literally a keystroke, all the way through.
Yeah, definitely. Great explanation there. Data quality is very difficult to kind of come by and kind of figure out what quality data means. So I think you explained it very well. And I'm sure throughout this process of finding quality data for any organization, really, there's a lot of pain points and issues that arise with that. And so what are some pain points that you've been able to see in terms of, collecting data quality or just finding data quality in general?
The biggest problem that we face when it comes to data quality is the definition. And ensuring that we have a common definition across an organization, but also anybody who consumes that data outside of the organization or possibly shares data with us. And all of those are very complex situations when you're trying to understand the data, ensure that we have commonality. And so the first thing is define your terms. Make sure everybody is consistent in understanding, et cetera, because we all come from different roles. We come from different places. While we think we all know what the definition of quality is, it's not going to be consistent if you poll the room. And it will depend on roles. It will depend on history. And some of it may be very academic. It doesn't matter. You combine all of that. And once you've defined it, now you've beat one of the biggest hurdles: common language, common understanding. With that understanding now comes the ability to look at what your pain points are locally, because I can walk into any company and each of those companies will have different challenges, and they may not have even identified them yet. I like to use an analogy, a role that I had when I was at Microsoft. It was day one, and my general manager came to me and said, "We're losing data in our data feeds. Go figure out why." Well, that's not a simple thing when you're day one on a job. You've got to figure out, so where does the data come from? How does it get created? How do we manage it when it first streams in? And then what do you do to make it analytically ready? So one of the first things I did is I just started having conversations. And by understanding what the different perspectives are, again, I identified that there was no commonality in the way that people were looking at it. And one of the most important things, and this comes down to the biggest pain point, nobody was looking at what the end user needed. And so I'm trying to define it operationally. I'm going to have an SLA. You're going to get it by this time. You're going to get this much data every hour, whatever it might be. We can measure those. Those are really easy to measure. But there's so much beneath that we need to identify.
Yeah, absolutely. And in addition to this, I know that offline you had also talked to me about this bottom-up approach that you take in order to kind of organize everything. And so what makes the bottom-up approach more, I don't know what the right word is, but like, why is it better in comparison to other approaches in terms of kind of improving the organization structure overall?
The reason I like a bottom-up approach is that, first of all, data is everybody's job. It's their life. We create it just by sneezing. How many tissues did you use today? Data has become the lifeblood of that business. It's your health, it's safety, it's everything. And so you have to learn how to manage that in a way that is useful and meaningful to your company or organization. In order to do that, you need to talk to your users. Your end users will tell you about the data. They'll define it. They help you define your data dictionary. I don't like the top down, just because we start putting in structures and frameworks and all these things, and we could be dead wrong. Could you imagine if you start thinking one thing, like this data is used for finance, and so therefore it's really important to make sure the dollars and cents add up and everything else. But then you bring that data to marketing, and while they care about the sales margins, et cetera, they also care about a lot of factors of engagement. Well, that's vastly different. And yet that is what is in the data that both groups are consuming. So you have to think about, how is the data used? How do they define it? And then grow a foundation. Again, that quality foundation is the first thing I like to look at. Completeness, on time, accuracy, being able to explain your data in terms of measurement, being able to watch what those trends are over time. It will tell you so much just about not only the data and how you mechanically move it from one place to another, but also how does it vary based on time of day, locale, and a lot of other factors. So first of all, learn about your data. And the only way to do that is dig down, bottom up. Then you can define what governance really needs to be based on the gaps. So is it really important for you to have all the dimensions of master data defined, et cetera? Not necessarily. That's something you can build later. You should have an idea, sales, marketing, et cetera, but don't let that define your approach, because the thing is, we're all using the same data and it's everyone's job.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are some ways that individuals or organizations can really limit the ways that they're struggling as an overall organization right now?
The major struggle is usually money, data governance, data quality, et cetera. They're not money-making ventures. In fact, data quality can cost a lot of money. So the very first thing you have to determine is, based on the use, what do you really need to invest in that data? So that's the first thing that I like to consider. I've talked about definitions, defining common language. That's actually one of the bigger struggles. Come up with ways to communicate. The next is focus. You can drive what people focus on when you measure data, when you are defining quality. but you have to make sure also that they agree and understand what you're saying. So again, it all comes back to, language. Imagine language was your first data. So that again, listen to your users. They're going to lead you to the critical factors they face and also explain their needs. And then, the last thing is assess the data regularly. You can't say, this is all I have to measure right now, and that's all I'm going to measure for the end of my world. You have to think about the fact that data is this living, breathing animal. Sometimes it's a sloth, sometimes it's a lion, and sometimes it's a real skunk. And when it's a skunk, everybody kind of dives in and tries to find their own way of dealing with it. But what really needs to happen is you have to make sure that everybody comes together. So define it, coordinate, communicate, and then have the right people in the room. Define who those people should be when there's an issue, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. Great explanation there. And I wanted to say thank you so much, Andrea, for joining us today. Where can everyone find you online just to connect with you?
Well, first of all, LinkedIn is, our godsend. It gives us a way to find almost anybody in the world, and I'm really grateful for that. But another thing I'd like to talk about is that I'm heavily engaged with ISA, which is the International Association of Software Architects. I was actually the first woman or first person to be certified as an information architect through that organization. And now I want to pay it forward and collaborate to build a women in architecture group. I'm working with others across the world, actually. So if you're interested in talking to me, ping me on LinkedIn, especially if you're interested in finding out more about the Women in Architecture group. And if you'd like to be a founding member of that.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I will make sure to try to connect you with people within our organization, other women that might be interested in this as well. And for more information on the data standard, you can find us at www.datastandard.io, as well as on our LinkedIn and YouTube channel. And thank you so much, Andrea, for joining us. It was such a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you.